Welcome to Phakama Africa, your unconventional news source.
Here at Phakama Africa Media, we do things differently without conforming to what is done or believed.
Join us on this journey of uncovering the story behind the story.
This is Phakama Africa Media, and as we look at the true state of the nation, that being South Africa, the crime scene, we're joined now by independent political analyst Tshepo Khadima and also my co-host, and that is and Dooley. Good to have you, and thanks so much for joining us.
Great, thank you for inviting me to be here with you on this very important beginnings. Yes. The new beginnings for Phakama Africa, and congratulations to Phakama Africa Media.
Thank you. Okay, the true revolt, or in your view, is that poor revolt brewing in the sense of out of frustration of what's happening in South Africa?
It is inevitable South Africa is entering a precipice whereby everything is going to explode in a violent manner. It was John F. Kennedy who said that a country or a state that cannot look after the majority who are poor, it will not be able to protect the few who are rich. And therefore, if you look at the increasing number of people who really social welfare is not able to meet their needs, the unemployment levels are ever increasing, and the youth unemployment. So the Arab Spring equivalent, I think, is about to happen in South Africa, but this time not sponsored by foreign interest, but effectively is going to be ignited by just the majority who have lost hope.
The social system or the safety net was not there prior to 1994. Did this not also cripple the black majority, if you like, in being more dependent on the state, as opposed to that money being invested in, say, free education or entrepreneurship?
Well, if you talk about free education, we spend per capita more than most nations. The question becomes that who are the beneficiaries of that educational budget that the state allocates year in, year out? And you find that the beneficiaries of that huge budget are actually foreign countries who in fact, you can measure the economic activity of the country based on the educational material that is produced. Most of it, which is unfortunately produced outside of this country. So until such time that we have an industrial policy that encourages, by and large, manufacturing of the things that we can be able to manufacture competitively for domestic consumption, before we even talk about exports, we will start to really say we can arrest that perpetual decline. So education beyond the amount of money that we spend, also we have to be asking is the most feasible way of delivering good quality education in a classroom, or are there other alternatives? E-learning, for example. There's a lot of talk about fourth industrial revolution, but what is it? Sadly, those that are in government have not even been able to explain in elementary terms what fourth industrial revolution is, which in a simplest way you can put it is just effectively tools that enable society and people in general to do things more efficiently and with less cost.
I hear what you're saying, Tshepo, but people may just say to you, South Africa is free. In 1994 they got their independence. Why are they complaining now? What is this revolution that Tshepo and them are talking about?
You have to bear in mind that freedom was largely political, and I think it was none other than the Louis Farrakhan who spoke to say, you get freedom and the flag and the national anthem but economic freedom is something that has never given to South Africa. We have a state in 1994 on the 23rd of June, when the first budget of a democratic South Africa was read in Parliament. At that time already, 31 cents of what the state earned in taxes had to go towards paying off the debt that we had. And already at the time we had a backlog. Hence we had a minister, the first minister, J. Naidu, being called Minister Without Portfolio, and being referred to as a minister in charge of the RDP, the Reconstruction and Development Program, which was actually a pre-manifesto, a plan of the African National Congress, which I think it was launched in 1993, in preparation for governing. And when you look at the Reconstruction and Development Plan, it really spoke more about the urgent need to allocate resources and to construct social infrastructure, housing, clinics, schools. But there were no resources to be able to do that. And that unfortunately meant that in your country we had increased urbanization, which was not planned for. And that brought in many other pressures, which the government has been caught, unfortunately, unawares, and has not been able to plan ahead for it. Look now, then we had maybe, 40 million people? Today we're sitting at 58 million people.
Yeah, but is the genesis, and I want us to deal with issues in bite sizes, the genesis of the bulk of the problems, particularly when it comes to lack of resources, because of the apartheid debt, as you were saying, that they had already had a backlog in having to pay for that debt?
Yeah, what was the problem was exacerbated not only by the debt that we had, which at the time was 300 million US dollars, 1994, and then there was the issue of the gold reserves of the country, which had been stolen in the 10 years prior to 1994. 3,000 tons of gold. And we've spoken at length about this. We have challenged even the governor of the central bank, Recession, that if what we were saying was a preposterous allegation, he could take a selfie at the bunker there next to his office and show us the gold that is there. And we have got records that showed what gold reserves we had in 1984. So when we say that 3,000 tons of gold were stolen, it's not an imagination, it's not something that we are contriving, but it's actually something that we are able, those of us who are analysts and economic commentators, we are able to back it up because we've got information and records that show what reserves the state had. So not only did we lose that, but the central bank itself, or the South African Reserve Bank, the makeup of the South African Reserve Bank was already in such a manner that it could not assist the state to have the capacity to be able to respond in an adequate manner to the socio-economic challenges that will be faced by the country.
Yes.
So the reserves, as you were asking, Zanet, where
was
do
it
they
stolen
go?
to, and how did it leave the country?
The president of the country actually needs to institute a commission of inquiry for a number of reasons, because a judicial commission of inquiry will have the powers not only to investigate and to subpoena witnesses, but will also be able to come up with findings that can then be exercisable in terms of recovering those reserves of gold that had been stolen. FVA de Klerk, he cannot escape the responsibility of having to be transparent and honestly answer this country as to what happened, taking into account not only his role as the state president of the apartheid government, but also in the other ministerial positions that he held during the time of P.A.B. Botha. The former governor of the central bank, Chris Stals, he himself can be able to assist this nation as to what has happened to that. But I'm saying all of that, but I must also add that the current governor of the central bank, Recession, and his immediate predecessors, they themselves know what has happened, but for reasons inexplicable that they've not been able to share with the nations, why have they not done anything to remedy that? And what we have been hearing, and the reason I'm saying we are on the verge of a violent revolt, is that the central bank's capacity has been effectively outsourced
Yeah.
and privatized to do the primary functions of what a central bank should do. The current Secretary General of the African National Congress, I don't think that he took good counsel at the time he made those statements. He spoke about a thing called quantitative easing. I just wish that he had taken counsel to understand that you can't speak of quantitative easing without first fixing the structure of the South African Reserve Bank. One of the weaknesses in the South African Reserve Bank on a macroeconomic policy, and then macroeconomic policy,
Yes.
one of the pillars in there is monetary policy. You will be shocked, and viewers will be shocked to know that the current South African Reserve Bank Act, the definition of money is founded word for word in the 1920 Currency and Banking Act. So from 1920, we have not effectively changed the definition to define in more in current terms and relevant terms what constitutes money. So that definition in the South African Bank Act of what constitutes money, with its origins in the 1920 Currency and Banking Act, constitute only 6% of the total money supply in the country. There is 92% of money supply which is privatized. So when you see so much resistance to even ensuring that the Reserve Bank is not owned by private shareholders, is because you will be dealing with the 92% which is under their control of money supply. So the state and the government don't even have the capacity to be able to create money. They have outsourced that to the privateers. And the 6% that they control, that itself has been outsourced, whereby the South African banknote company has since been closed since 2013. And the printing of our banknote, we've dealt with this previously, is done by Europeans.
I want us to just go back and the implications of what you're saying, that we are sitting on historical legislation or even policies, 1920 Banking Act. What does that mean in terms of economic inclusion, in terms of disposable income, primarily for the majority black?
For the majority of the citizens, and sometimes we speak of, okay, you have this situation in South Africa. Politically, we have this. Let me go back this way. When the European settlers came to South Africa, they didn't come here as a united, homogeneous group of people. They came from Europe, divided themselves. And when they settled here, their divisions from Europe, they entrenched them. So you have a situation, let's speak about the key resource being land. Yes. Only 34,000 whites own land. But they then have spent so much money in the media to tell every white person in this country that they stand to lose a piece of land. When the 4 million whites themselves are no different from the Africans whose land was dispossessed, because it's only 34,000 whites who own land. But that comes as a result of that when they settled in this country, they were divided. So they excluded. For example, an Afrikaner is not Dutch exclusively. An Afrikaner is a number of people who, or some of them of French origin, Belgian, and then you've got the Anglo-Saxons. So between the Anglo-Saxons, who by and large are homogeneous, and the rest of the Afrikaners, it's only 34,000. So the rest are as dispossessed, but they have been led to believe this untruth, that they stand to lose something. Now, those very few who I would call them totalitarian fanatics, who have hoarded the resources of this country, are the ones that are sponsoring not only policies, but legislation. And where the legislation doesn't exist, they have legislated protections for themselves, which are at the expense of the majority.
Okay, we're going to take a comfy break and we'll continue to stay with us on social media, engage with us, share your thoughts as we try and fix this country one episode at a time.
South Africa is entering a precipice whereby everything is going to explode in a violent manner. The unemployment levels are ever increasing, the youth unemployment.
We will intensify our efforts and create jobs.
Humans are not as needed in production as they were needed in the past.
People are going to lose jobs.
You know, talking of our current president, we're seeing that he is being sponsored by big business. Wouldn't you say that that's a way of sort of reconciling with big business? Or that will help South Africa in the long run?
Not at all. And what we have here, we have a president who bought his position. Except he didn't pay for it himself. It was paid for by people who certainly could only have done so because they stood to gain a great deal. It was not out of benevolence. It was not out of some pious principle that they would like us to believe that they were doing. And interestingly, all of them that we now know from the leaks, the Ramaphosa leaks, all of them without fail have been rewarded in some way or another. Now that means that the president we have in the country today has committed a cardinal sin of violating the constitution of this country. And if there is no action whatsoever, if there is no consequence for that violation, the rule of law, as we would have liked to, as promised in the constitution, is a thing of history. There is no more rule of law. Therefore, it means no one in this country is safe at all.
And the lack of consequences, you say, impunity, what does that, what kind of an environment does it create, especially for the public psyche?
Well, we now have to bear this in mind. We are on the verge of ordinary people losing confidence even in the judiciary. And once that happens, it means we're going to end up with self-help. And self-help in simple terms is anarchy. So we are entering a phase where there will be anarchy. The judges, and having none other than the Judge President of the Gauteng High Court, Judge President Dustin Mlambo's admission that he knew of cases of members of his own court, the judges or the justices who are corrupt, but having taken no action whatsoever to bring that to an end. It means, therefore, as a country, that is the end. And I think the other commentators, such as attorney Raymond Shalom, who has spoken, and they seem to be dismissive of the allegations that he is making, instead of actually demanding that the judiciary's financial affairs and any other interests be disclosed to the public so that we know what are our judges up to, who is influencing them. It means that we are going to enter a phase of self-help, because the ordinary people, they will have no reason whatsoever to either resort to the courts to be the final arbiter in all disputes. And once you enter that, it is not possible to actually even think that you can get the army or the police to unleash brutality in order to bring law and order. It is the end of the road. So I'm lamenting the fact that specifically the judiciary, heavy is the head that wears the crown. The judiciary in this country, they are wearing a much heavier crown. And unfortunately, their conduct, they need to have a self-introspection whereby they need to take action to really bring about an immediate end where we as the citizens can have faith in the judiciary.
The last hope being the Constitutional Court as well. Do you think that sentiment also applies, that the Constitutional Court could lose its credibility if that is not the case?
The role of the judiciary, and more so the Constitutional Court, is to really do three things. Is to give rulings that clarify the law in a consistent manner so that there is certainty about the future. So the Latin is stare decisis, meaning that therefore for the future we know that they can apply based on case law so that our jurisprudence is developed. Now the Constitutional Court by and large is still new, and with it being new and being the highest court, the apex court in the country, one of the things that I have often lamented is the fact that it's got a dearth of judicial experience as opposed to the Supreme Court of Appeal. The Supreme Court of Appeal collectively has got a higher judicial experience than the Constitutional Court, which is the highest. My view, and I'm not the only one who shares that view, there are other scholars of law who share it, that the Constitutional Court should have been a division of the Supreme Court of Appeal instead of it being the highest court. And it is therefore not surprising that that dearth of judicial experience has resulted in a number of rulings by that very same court where you wonder how it has happened. How is it happened that the same court can rule on two similar matters in a different way?
Let's use the public protector example.
Oh, yeah.
The public protector example is inexplicable in the extreme. And I think that if there is no action taken at the Judicial Service Commission against those justices, it is going to be a gross injustice. It's going to be a travesty of justice in this country. In that, it can never be that you make a finding where on a ruling by the lower court, which in this case was the High Court, but that is not related. They made a finding that the public protector has lied, and I think the Black Lawyers Association amply made that point, that the High Court had not come to that finding. How did it therefore that the Constitutional Court could have made that finding in the first instance? Secondly, how do you then explain the duty of the public protector to act without fear, favor, or prejudice? And secondly, that punitive sanction for damages, apart from the explanation that has been made by Raymond Shalom, which I appreciate, it would also fall under the law of delect. So you have to actually attribute the harm that the litigants have suffered, quantifiable, and it cannot be arbitrarily that you pay 15% of the costs or 100% of the costs. And it is effectively a flawed legal principle that has been misused, tragically misused by the highest court in the land. And I think that the Chief Justice Mogoeng minority judgment in the public protector ruling is something that we should actually pursue as a country to ensure, because it was more measured and it stayed loyal to the law. The moment you have judges, and there are instances of judges who have not been loyal to the law, it is the end of the country as we would know it.